We'll go over a brief historical sketch of the higher degrees of Masonry. According to traditional and documentary evidence in possession of the Union Sovereign Sanctuary of the Royal Masonic Rite, Masonry had its origin in Egypt. But in these days and times, those that's calling themselves Master Masons, they never even met with an Egyptian adept. All ancient Masonry is entirely Egyptian. All who take the higher degrees have convincing proof that many centuries before Christ, Egypt practiced Masonic work, but it was the mystery system. Men received their education by initiation into Egyptian Masonry. Hiram gave Solomon, king of Israel, authority to establish and work the lower degrees. And we know that Hiram is the Moors, the high priest of Anu, also known as Thoth or Tahuti, where he has the finger that the Hebrews use, which is the Yod or the Yod or the seven, which Noble Drew Ali brought, who was Professor Drew, the only Egyptian adept that came to the Americas and pulled the veils off of Masonry, because the keys was lost, as my grandfather said. The keys he feared of the Logos, the information was lost. But it wasn't lost. The keys just wasn't released until 1927. That's why I'm here in regards to the bloodline of Pike, because he knew, but he didn't know certain things because it was being held back from the outside world. Hiram gave Solomon, king of Israel, authority to establish and work the lower degrees. Masonic degrees were worked by the colleagues of builders at Rome 715, and Masonry in Great Britain was derived from the colleagues. In AD 926, King Athelstan gave to British Masons a constitution, now called the Charter of York, authorizing the work and conferring of the lower or symbolic degrees. Edward III revised this constitution in 1351 or 1359. In AD 1314, Robert Bruce, King of Scotland, gave Masons the right to work certain degrees. But we know Robert the Bruce tried to get his heart taken to Jerusalem, and we know he fought against the Moors. The Moors was the true custodians of this Egyptian adept mystery system. So Robert the Bruce gave Masons the right to work certain degrees, which you know they was tainted, because they took them from the Moors while they was colonizing the empire, just like with France or the French protectorate, who now the Scottish Rite hold hand to hand. 1685, the Knights of St. Andrew were worked by authority claiming to have been derived from James III, King of Scotland. In 1754, 25 degrees under the name of the Rite of Strict Observance were worked at Paris, France by Jesuit priests. But they was tainted because they took them by the Moors after they murdered them. Just like the Scotland Yard. All that was the Moors' information. Just like the Alexandria Library or the Holy Ghost Library was burnt down. And in return, they went and burned down the Moors' library that had the Moorish manuscripts, which we already went over. In 1753, 25 degrees under the name of the Emperors of the East and West were worked at the Lyons, France by Jesuit priests. In 1789, 25 degrees under the title of Consistory of Princes of the Royal Secret Rite of Perfection were worked at Bordeaux, France, by questionable authority. It is claimed that from 25 degrees, the so-called Scottish Rite of 33 degrees was arranged at Charleston, South Carolina in 1801. By what authority, no one has ever been able to ascertain. 'Tis a well-known fact that philosophers, kings, and priests prior to 1750 were generally instructed in Egyptian Masonry or the Egyptian mysteries. Therefore, it will be seen how easy it was for this class of men to establish new rites from the old mysteries. But all Masonic degrees came directly or indirectly from Egypt. And the 96 degrees of the Royal Masonic Rite include all ancient Masonic work. But you got all these Europeans that was over here trying to interpret. But then you have an Egyptian adept who came known as Omar ibn Said in the Carolinas. And they was trying to take all of his stuff and translate it, mailing it off to different people and messing all the translations up. Again, Albert Pike stated he feared the Logos meanings was lost forever, but Professor Drew, an actual Egyptian adept who went there and came out between the feet of the Sphinx, and they said that he was a prophet. He came to the Americas and released the keys in 1927. Again, that's why I'm here, because Albert Pike was searching for these mysteries to get them all together, but he couldn't get them because the keys was held from the outside world. Let me get Noble Drew Ali's works and I'll show you. The reasons these lessons have not been known is because the Muslims of India, Egypt, and Palestine had these secrets and kept them back from the outside world. And when the time appointed by Allah, they loosened the keys and freed the secrets. And for the first time, I repeat, for the first time in ages have these secrets been delivered in the hands of the Muslims of America. And that's Professor Drew, Prophet Noble Drew Ali. He specifically went to Egypt, was tested on his adeptness, and came out in between the feet of the Sphinx. The most direct transmission of the entire 96 degrees of Masonry from Egypt to Europe occurred 1766, after which for several years a portion of the degrees were worked under different names in various countries. The first recorded by Egyptian Rite Masons of high degrees in the quote-unquote USA was the establishment of Providence Royal Art Chapter Number 1 at Providence, Rhode Island in 1793. Thomas W. Morse, 28 degrees, Peleg Clark, 28 degrees, and Moses Seoxis, 45 degrees. Deputy Inspector General of all Masonry in Rhode Island, officiating. These facts are now to be seen on the records of Providence Chapter. 90 degrees, under the name of the Rite of Mizraim, which is Moorish, were established under the self-constructed grand body at Milan, Italy in 1806. The degrees of the so-called rite were introduced into the quote-unquote United States in 1867. 90 degrees under the name of the Egyptian Masonic Rite of Memphis were established at Montauban, France under the self-constituted grand body in 1814. The sovereign sanctuary was transferred to Paris and established the first body of the rite in the quote-unquote United States in 1836. In 1865, a few of the members in New York claimed to have reduced the degrees of the Rite of Memphis to 33 under the name of the ancient and primitive rite, in consequence of which differences arose. And in addition, 3 sovereign sanctuaries of the 96 degrees was finally organized in the quote-unquote United States. 2 of these united in 1883. In 1884, a careful and thorough investigation was made concerning the origin of the charters of these different sanctuaries. You have to go to Egypt, or you have to be in the room in an adept chamber with an Egyptian adept. You can't just start making charters and making self-constituted charters. We have the audio of the Shriners and the Masons talking about they went to the World's Fair, to the Moorish Science Temple and all that, but they was selling the charters there. It wasn't the true Egyptian adept chambers. Just like with me, the bloodline through the Pike daughters. I can't just constitute it myself. I've been proven tried and true by the Moorish Science Temple of America, by the Moors, by a convention which was held in Boston, December 1884, in response to a summons properly prepared and mailed to every person known to have received the 33 degrees, 90, and 95 or 96 degrees of these respective rites or bodies. At this convention, all working bodies in the quote-unquote United States are represented. 1,007 members were present, representing 24 states of the Union. And since the convention, nearly all the working bodies have ratified its actions. It was unanimously voted that the proposed union was very desirable. Then the first 3 degrees, craft masonry, be left to the control of the craft lodges and craft grand lodges at that. As representatives of all the working bodies in the quote-unquote United States of the 3 rights, they ignore all former charters and constitution and proclaim themselves the Union sovereign sanctuary of the Royal Masonic Rite, controlling all degrees above the 3rd, heretofore known as Egyptian Masonry. You see how they just splitting and cutting and adding and It's crazy. A constitution was unanimously adopted and officers elected. Nearly all the officers are Knights Templar, and a large majority of members of the A&A, or Scottish Rite, of the entire membership, 16,000. What Albert Pike say? This is for the few. But they're sitting here just making thousands and thousands of these Masons, and adept is born, not made. You can't make one. He got to go into the adept, and they got to find out if he has it or not. That's what Noble Drew Ali did. He went to Egypt, went through the adept chambers, and came out between the legs of the Sphinx. Charters have already been granted to sovereign sanctuaries in Turkey, India, France, Scotland, and the Argentino Confederation, and other applications are pending. While the sovereign sanctuary of Canaan land has entered into a treaty of alliance and friendship with the sovereign sanctuary, the Royal Masonic Rite has no fight with any other rite of Masonry. It does not in any way interfere or confer the degrees of any other rite of Masonry, but adheres strictly to its motto, "Whosoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them." Truth does not change nor pass away. Just simple things like Albert Pike speaking about don't mark your apron. Because we'll read this about, I'll break it down real fast how they're violating even Albert Pike. Albert Pike stated the symbolism is lost when one blocks or defaces the white surface with images or colors of any kind. And you go look now, their aprons are all decorated and looking all crazy, man. They violate Albert Pike. You've lost your way, and I'm telling you right now, you all are being let off the cliff like the pigs. Even Jesus went through the adept chambers, and I have the recordings of it. Noble Drew Ali brought it, but you all don't have it. And if you do have pieces of it, you don't have the interpretation, because it ain't been released until Noble Drew Ali and the bloodline of the Moors in the Americas. Like it or not, I leave you in peace and love. Islam, Islam, Islam. Shalom, shalom, shalom.